In the Know.
Welcome. Good evening. I'm Miss Jill. This is In the Know, brought to you by Our Neutral Voices. So it said somewhere that service is the rent that you pay for room on this earth. Again, service is the rent that you pay for room on this earth. So tonight we have a special guest with us who is definitely paying for his room on this earth. I want to welcome Mr. Albert Brownlee. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good
Good evening. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm lovely. Two wonderful gentlemen on the panel with me this evening. So welcome the gentlemen and welcome you. So before we get started, Mr. Albert Brownlee, CCO of Genesis Outreach, go ahead and tell us a little bit about Mr. Brownlee.
About Mr. Brownlee?
About Mr. Brown, just a little bit, because we're going to get into a lot of it. So just a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm currently the senior pastor of Come As You Are Community Church, and I'm bivocational. I also serve as a chief compliance officer at Genesis Outreach, married, father of four, have two lovely grandchildren by my eldest son and my daughter-in-law, and Fort Wayne native. Although I no longer live here, I do commute in for both work as well as for church. This is my hometown. Raised all my kids here, and my younger kids are growing up down in the Indianapolis area. But this is where I'm from. Family's from here. A good portion of my family. A lot of people may recognize Brownlee Market.
Yeah,
yes, it's the
right.
same family. So,
Right.
yeah.
All right. Yes, quite a name in the city. So, again, thank you for being here. And we're going to start out talking a little bit about Genesis Outreach. For those who do not know, even for those that do, who want to become a little more familiar, can you tell us a little bit about what Genesis Outreach is?
Sure. Genesis Outreach was founded in 1988 by a former guest on one of your shows, Linda Golden. It was a passion project of hers. She felt a calling to serve women in our community who were overcoming addictions and were homeless. And so when it originally started, it was just an 8-bed transitional house for women in the urban community. There was no such thing at that time in the late 80s. Over the years, we've grown by leaps and bounds. Today, Genesis is a statewide community housing development organization. Here in town, we have about 50 properties in which we house homeless families and individuals. We still provide services to mothers overcoming addictions. Our original program, we call that the Heart of Genesis, of who we are, and provide a number of support services, and social advocacy has become a big movement of ours in probably the past 15 years or so. And yeah, that's who we are in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I want to say, fortunately, we have programs like Genesis. Unfortunately, it's always going to be a need, in our community and in all communities. A little bit about how you got involved, because I know that you mentioned your pastoral journey. We talked a little bit earlier about law. I know that you used to or still were an avid performer. So the list goes on and on about things that you have done. But I know that there is something that you felt when you entered, the Genesis realm, where you were saying that it felt like home. So let's talk about what home felt like when you first came aboard, and what has kept you there.
Sure. Well, I'll answer your question, but I'll start at the end of the journey. When I look at where I sit today, from pastoring to working for Genesis family, my true life experience is that, I believe that all roads have led to here. I can look back now over things that were passion, interests, hobbies, and how they all were very influential in developing who I am as a servant leader. There was a time in life when I didn't even know what that word was.
Gotcha.
And then to come and understand that that's not only what it is, but who God has created me to be. So my path to Genesis actually started I would have to go back to that. I first met Miss Golden in middle school. She was, by all intent and purposes, the mean administrative assistant over at Memorial Park Middle School. And we did not want to ask her for bus passes because we all were scared of her. Yes, we were absolutely scared of her. For years, I didn't even make the connection that one of my best friends from high school's mom was the mean lady from middle school.
That was her.
Because it was just, I put it in two different categories. Till one day I'm looking back at the middle school yearbook. I'm like, wait a second, I know you. And so we laugh about that all the time. And she says, yes, she was a little mean too, if she would be honest. But, you know, all those things from arts and things of that nature involved me in being community minded and taking care of my community, probably first starting in just providing entertainment, providing space to make people feel better.
Sure.
And those things led to singing in churches or singing in music groups, which again is a type of ministry, a type of service to others, singing at person's funerals, singing at their weddings.
Sure.
And those things, I always like to tell people, people say, well, you do those type of things. And I say, I found out it's a place of honor, not so much because your name is going up in lights, but because those are things that people will always remember.
Yeah.
They'll remember their wedding day and they'll
Yeah.
remember who showed up when someone passed
Absolutely.
that they loved.
Right.
And so I've come to see all of that to rose to this is how I landed here. Genesis went off to college. I was ready to leave Fort Wayne, left Fort Wayne, went to Atlanta, went to undergrad at Clark Atlanta University, and was headed to law school. I majored in political science as an undergraduate. And so I knew I wanted to go to law school and graduated, and then felt a call to return home, not to go to law school. And I began working with Allen County government. And while working there is when I began to interface with Genesis, because I was working on pretrial diversion programs, and that being a community agency was an agency I would refer persons to who were going through the legal system who needed those services. And Mrs. Golden sought me out. And she said, listen, I was in prayer. This is how it happened. Now, some people may not be people of faith, but she said, I was praying and God told me that you need to come work for Genesis. Now, if it had been anyone else, I probably would have been like, oh, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to this. I'm not leaving my job.
Right.
I'm fresh out of college. I've been working there a few months, making a lot of money. And that's what it was, and enjoying, kind of feeling like, oh yeah, I could see myself going on off to law school and doing what my original goals were. And but I prayed about it, and I felt a call that said, do this. At the time, she couldn't pay me what Allen County government was paying me.
Yeah.
But little did I know that those were seeds into the future, and anything that I gave up in those moments, from finances to whatever I thought positionally that I had or was working towards, God has certainly more than repaid. And so the way I got there was because someone heard a voice and they told me what God said to them, and I trusted in it, and it was the right thing. My first weekend, she took me down to a state housing conference, and literally probably midway through the first day, I turned to her and I said, I think I've made a big mistake. This is not for me. This is absolutely boring. I don't know anything about housing, and why am I here?
I don't like this.
No, I don't like it. Why do we care about homeless people? I was young, young man out of college. This is bad. And she turned to me and she said, Albert, just give it a chance. I think you'll do well here.
Right.
And she was right.
Yeah.
She was absolutely right. There were moments when on my road to CEO, where I thought I would leave the organization because I had outgrew it. I ended up getting my MBA. I felt I reached a glass ceiling. I was director of operations under her. And at the time I said, well, Genesis had been good to me, so I was going to give them a year's notice. Had a meeting on the calendar, and she interrupted that meeting and said, hey, I know we're supposed to meet next week, but I need to meet with you now. At which point this was 2011, and she said, I met with the board and I'm going to be retiring. And they asked me if there's anyone in the organization that they should consider. Yeah. And you're the only name. Are you interested? And about 6 to 7 months later, that landed me in the role of CEO. And I never thought that would have happened. I was preparing to exit the organization. Sure. I did exit the organization at the end of 2019. I resigned because I didn't live in the community any longer. I'd been commuting here, and the new leader had been chosen, and we were going through that transition process. And then in 2020, I went to law school and ended up graduating from law school, which had been a lifetime goal 3 years later. And at the same time that I was graduating, they were in the need for a chief compliance officer.
Yeah.
And they said, "Are you interested?" And I thought,
Here we
Back
go.
to
again.
Here we go.
Here we go
and
again.
so here we are.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But
ahead,
before you, and I listened to your story, and it's amazing. And I have to tell you that it's good that you follow the calling or the prayer that Miss Golden had, because we interacted when you were working at Genesis. I had some clients that came through the program, and one of them to this day, and I hope she's watching, I won't say her name, but she sings your praises. She said that she wouldn't have made it through if it was not for you. She said many a night she's thought about walking away from the program.
Wow.
But you would have conversations with her, you would talk with her and things like that. And that's what got her through. She's graduated from college. She got her associates first. She got her bachelor's. She's doing well. But when we first got her there, she wasn't in the
Right.
space. But I saw the transition through when she was at Genesis and the things. And to this day, when I speak of you, she just lights up and just
wow.
sing your praises.
Yeah. Yeah. Linda had a saying, that the opportunity was available for a new beginning for anyone at Genesis. And it was a play off of, obviously the word Genesis meaning beginning. But so often we felt we would get the most broken people who had tried to go through other programs, oftentimes were not successful, would find their way to Genesis.
Yeah.
They were kicked out of an agency. No one else would any longer serve them in the community. And we would give them a chance. And I'm thankful because those type of stories, that gives you your whys.
Yes.
It's the value behind it all. I wouldn't trade this life in for any part because of the fact that for every life, every seed that you've sown, to be able to see people who start off absolutely sometime in the worst conditions, who are totally broken,
Yes.
Right.
and then they rebound. And it not only speaks to the restorative power of Christ, but it also speaks to the power of just kind service and love and
Yes.
just being good people can have the type of impact you can have on someone's life that becomes systemic. Because you change one person, it's not just changing them, but you're changing their children's
Absolutely.
lives,
Absolutely.
their spouses and people connected to them. And so an entire family gets transformed when one life is changed.
Yes. I was talking to someone the other day. I actually work in kind of the same field. I go into recovery homes. I work with gentlemen who are on parole, who are addicted, who are in recovery. So I was talking to someone the other day, and we were saying, the reward for doing this type of work is not anything that is, tangible or concrete. But like you said it, having someone come to you with their head down, absolutely no hope, and watching, their head, come back up. And not just that, but watching the relationship come back with their children, watching that flourish, seeing them get their driver's license. That is the reward for this type of work. And it's not easy because not everyone's head stays up. And in any line of work, but this specifically, a lot of people, have just been beaten down mentally and physically, and sometimes you're the only kind smile or voice, that they'll see. So I definitely know that this is a difficult line of work, but also very rewarding. And, I had down Linda. I had Linda written down even before you started talking about Linda. So, and I bring this up because even when we are called, because a lot of us, we know we're being called, but we don't answer. We're not ready yet. So I'm going to set that right there. Even when we are ready, we need something to push us or someone else to see it. And I feel like everyone needs a Linda. Everyone truly does. Bus passes or not. Everyone needs a Linda. So, have you ever told Linda how much she has impacted your life?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
She's very well aware. We're still in connection to this day, and we'll meet from time to time or just pick up the phone and call or visit with one another. But yeah, she's aware. And it's interesting that you said you had down to talk about her. If you ask me about Genesis, there's no way I can talk about Genesis Outreach without talking about
I see
Linda
that.
Golden.
I see that.
And because of that, there's no way that I can talk about. I just said here recently we had a town hall meeting and I was facilitating, and I made the example about successor, you know, and the need to actually do exactly what you said, to pour into others, to go out and find the person who's your replacement.
Yes.
And I spoke about how that transition between Linda and me, you know, this was an organization she started, she led for 23 years at the time when she retired, and how she had to be willing to pass that on, but she had to find me.
Absolutely.
And then she had to prepare me for that role. And then at the point when I was prepared, I then was able to assume leadership, and then I had to eventually find my replacement. But where that becomes really critical is that that happened in 2000. What I didn't know is that in 2024, 24 years later, that I would be going through another successorship, which is larger scale, both spiritually and naturally, you know, and transitioning into the pastorate from a 30-year serving person in position, you know, of Come As You Are Community Church with overseer Anthony Payton, very well known in the community. And he, a very well established church. And that came out of nowhere. Yeah. It was not in the cards. If you had asked me in December of 2023, do you think you want to be a pastor? And my answer would have been, oh, no.
Yeah,
no.
right.
That is not in the deck of cards for me.
Right.
And so when people ask me about it today and they say, well, how do you feel? You know, and I'm almost, next month will be my 1 year anniversary. And I said, you know, the interesting part about this is that I feel for the first time in my life, 100% completely fulfilled, that I'm walking in the absolute purpose of God for my life. And it's doing something that I can honestly tell you with open heart, I never wanted to do, nor did I think I would do. And especially not back in Fort Wayne, Indiana, my hometown, where I don't even live any longer. But I drive up here multiple times throughout the week because the job calls for that.
Yes. And I think too, you know, a lot of times just hearing your story, there was a lot of stubborn moments, you know, whether it be you telling Linda, well, I don't want to do this, I don't like this. Along the way, we've all had those, you know, even though we're being called, we sometimes try everything in our power to fight it. And hearing you tell your story, you can literally tell when you surrendered.
Yeah.
And it's like when you surrendered to that, it is when, even when you spoke about it, like your face lit up and it became clear that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
And you spoke earlier about seeds and about paths and things like that. But and you said everything that you've done led up to this point. So not what I want to ask is this point where you are now, how can you help those not only in your church, but even at Genesis House? What is a new skill, nuance, knowledge, or something that you have that you can now share with somebody, not only at Genesis House, but through your walks of life?
Sure. One of the things that I tell people, anyone, a lot of people, when they're trying to figure out what their calling is in life, or why am I here? You know, that big question, what is my purpose? And they come to a blank page. You know, they're sitting there like, I don't know. And I can't, will someone please tell me? And one of the things that I've learned in my journey when I look at how my different life experiences, even from theater, even from performing, you know, something I've been doing since a child, look at things that you feel naturally drawn to.
Yes.
That there are clues there. There are signals there. Being involved in theater taught me how to speak in public at a very early age, and to be comfortable in front of crowds that are large as well as crowds that are small.
Right.
You know, and then you look at the different things. Genesis is where I became a servant leader and began to take care of my community. At Come As You Are is where my job is. I am serving and I am leading a congregation of people, not just 25 to 30 employees,
Right.
not just the clients that we're serving, but literally hundreds of people that then extends out into the greater community, because I might be the pastor of this church, but everywhere I go in this town, I am now pastor.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So that will shape how you live your life, and,
Yes.
and the example of that you have to be for people who are your members and people who just know you
Right.
as
Yes.
you're a pastor of a church.
Right.
And so all of those things, but there are signs, there are hints here along the way. I can now see 2020, right?
Yes.
You got that clear vision. You can look back and say, "Oh, this is why God allowed that to happen.
Yep.
Oh, this is why I was involved in that." You know, even from being in sports, you know, playing on teams, important. You know, I grew up in a sports family. My dad coached baseball. All the boys played baseball. We all played football. You know, that led up to high school. Played football in high school, and it's just like. But the skills that I learned being in sports taught me how to work with other people.
Absolutely.
Right.
Taught me how
Absolutely.
being a part of the team, you're not always going to be the leader. That
Right.
taught me how to follow. Because if you're not a good follower, you won't be a great leader. And
Yeah.
so, you know,
100%. So you mentioned performing.
Yes.
So let's talk about, I know that there's something you're super excited
I
to
am.
talk about
I am.
this evening. So I'm going to let you talk about that and tell us what's coming up. Let's talk about Jesus Christ Superstar.
absolutely. So what's coming up? Remember, I said Genesis for probably, you know, about 10 to 15 years now has been very involved in social advocacy. And one of the ways that I started to do that under my leadership was in 2016. We wanted to create an annual event that was different. Most people did the prayer breakfast or
Yeah.
gala and all
Right.
those things. And I said, what's my passion? I'm passionate about theater and performing. Maybe we should put on a play, have a dinner, invite people out, give them theater with a message that connects back to who we are. And so we've been doing that since 2016. Super excited that opening this Friday, May 16th, is Jesus Christ Superstar. Jesus Christ Superstar, for those who aren't familiar, you can probably figure it out. It's the story of Jesus, and he's a superstar. But it's retold. It was a famous Broadway musical from 1971, became a hit film in 1973. It was heavily Tony nominated. It did not win any Tony Awards because at that time on Broadway, this was really, you know, different and diverse. It was a play about Jesus,
Gotcha,
you know,
right.
and so it tells the story of his leading up to his crucifixion, but it takes a dive into it from the standpoint of who the people are.
Okay.
You know, Jesus as a man, who is Pilate, who is Judas, and how all these characters came together, Mary, his followers. And so we're able to present that at the University of St. Francis out at the North Campus, 2702 Spring Street. And it runs Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this weekend and next weekend, 7:30 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, 2 o'clock p.m. on Sundays.
Okay.
Now, are you in the play?
I am not in the play. I am the producer on this show. So I've committed that with my life work, I can only do about one play a year. And I just
Right.
did that in February. Genesis did their Black History show, which is something they do every year. And it was Pearly. And so I was in that show. But I am the producer on the show. So I'm working heavily with the artists as well as the production team, which I think would be very appropriate to bring up the name of Brandon Porter, very well known here in our community. He was the fine arts director over at Weiser Park Elementary for a number of years, and he's now with Greater Fort Wayne. But he is the actual director and music director on the show. Brandon has been a part of Genesis production since February of 24 last year when we did Ragtime. And to your point earlier about pulling people in, I worked with Brandon on a production for Civic Theater in 2022. And after that, we had a really good opportunity and good experience. And I started talking to him. I said, listen, I want you to get involved with this organization because I've sensed that I would be transitioning into other things. And so it was prior to Brandon coming on board and other people that we've partnered with, Leslie Beauchamp in the community. I did all the directing of all the shows from 2016 through 2022. And so this was the first time that we reached out, but even in that and pulling in others, we've been able to grow the scale of what we're doing, reach a different audience. And again, all those things and then give opportunities because Brandon has now had the opportunity to direct 3 different shows and he had never directed before in the community. And so again, it's just transferring creating that space for others.
Would it be fair to say that you were to Brandon as Linda was to you?
Oh, it'd be more than fair.
Yeah.
I'll take those kudos. It was me. No,
Because that's what it sounds
it,
like.
it was. Though.
Absolutely.
Seriously.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I've seen a couple of your plays, and you have a semi-regular cast. You have some people you work with kind of frequently. Is Fatima in this one as well?
So Fatima is not in this one. Fatima is in the middle of graduating
Okay.
with her master's degree. She walks tomorrow night, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
So even when Fatima was in the Black History show in February, and even that was a pull because for her, but she made that sacrifice because also being closely connected to the organization. To your point, we do work with a number of actors of all races and ethnicities, body sizes. We're actually trying to be a theater that is open and allows many different people to come in and be a part of our productions. But we do work with a kind of repeat group of people. And you'll see some new faces every show. That is intentional. The product that we try to put out with our shows, we want it to be the closest thing to a professional
Yeah, of course.
show that many people have seen, and that's what they've said. You know, they've come to our shows and they said, this is the most professional thing I've seen in Fort Wayne. It's like going to a Broadway show.
a compliment. Huge.
And when it is, and we take it as such. And so when they come to that, then they're able to have an experience. And so we want to duplicate that experience with every show. Might be different faces, but every show should be our best show. And so that's the
Yeah.
goal.
And I want to speak of that because you said you grew up in theater. And I know there's some little kids out there. There's a child out there, male, female, that's not a sports person, that's not an academic person, but they have this thing that they want.
Yes.
Artistically, we really don't push a lot of our children that way. It's changing now, but for the longest, we didn't push our children. What would you say to a child out there to be able to do what you do, you know, in a theater, or how to get in theater and how to get involved and follow that dream of theater?
Sure. Well, first I would tell people, you know, parents. I would speak to parents really, because oftentimes it's your parents who kind of shape and guide their children at very young ages. And I do think that's intentional. I think that's
course.
biblical. I think that parents should be involved. But the way that we need to be involved is try not to live out our dreams for our
Yes.
children.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct,
But
correct.
to listen and to look at them and identify and say, hey, I think there might be something here. Another good friend of mine who's also a part of Genesis and does shows and things, Rhea Edmonds. A lot of people may remember her. She was an editor with Journal Gazette. She is very well known for her works on stage as well as public speaking. Very well spoken, author. But Rhea told me a story really interesting when we were just doing Pearly. She said, do you know, because we were talking about how we grew up in church and would have to do speeches.
Right.
And we were talking about the kids who cried.
Right.
And Rhea was like, oh, I was a crier. She said for years, I would get up and go to the mic. I wouldn't say a word. I
Right.
would just cry. She said, and every year my mother would make me do a speech. I would practice it. I would learn it. And then it would be my turn. I would get up to the mic and I would cry until they took me down. And she said in one year, she finally, after several years of doing that, actually opened up her mouth and spoke, and she heard her voice amplified. And then she made a joke. She said, "No, I haven't stopped speaking since."
Right. I love it.
But I think as parents, to your point, if your kids are showing interest in the arts, they love to sing, they love to dance, they love to act. That is just as important as getting them connected to Metro football,
Right, right.
Amen.
AU basketball.
You're right.
You know, we have to be able to show our children, and particularly in communities of color, that there are various paths to becoming successful in life, and those
Right.
don't always start on the basketball court or the football field.
You're right.
They can be in different areas. If parents are specifically interested on how to get their children involved in theater, there are programs like the Fort Wayne Youth Theater, which is very successful. I started off there. And when I did the show for Civic a few years ago and was brought in as a guest director, we did a talk back after that, and he was talking about diversity. And I said, you would have never told me that at the age of 11, when I was the only black kid down here in this Arts United building, and I got the chance to perform with Harvey Cox, very well-known director. He's gone on now. He was who trained us, and I was on stage, and this was a new experience for me. But you would have never been able to tell me that fast forward 40 years later, you'll be back down here
Right.
directing
Yeah.
a Civic Theater
Right.
show.
Right.
Right.
And all of those things, they, like I said, just like anything else in life, it ties back to that. When I was 11 years old, the only reason why I got to youth theater is that someone saw me performing at Memorial Park Middle School, and they said, do you know about youth theater? Well, I grew up in the Black community.
Right,
Oh, what's
right.
the youth theater?
Right.
And I know about church, you know, and they said, well, you should come audition. And that's how I got there. And I told my dad took me down there. I auditioned and got in the show and didn't stop.
Love it. So before we get out of here, one more time, if you want to drop the dates
Yes, absolutely.
for that coming up.
Jesus Christ Superstar. It opens this Friday, May 16th, 17th, 18th, and then also the following weekend, the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, 7:30 p.m. on Friday and Saturday night, 2 o'clock p.m. on Sunday. They can purchase tickets by calling 260-744-2800. 260-744-2800, or they can go online to our show. So it's our.show, SHOW/JCS, Jesus Christ Superstar.
That was a whole commercial.
And not only Jesus Christ Superstar, of course, Genesis, I know it's an entity, but this entity needs help as well. How could someone be able to support Genesis? And if somebody is seeking help from Genesis, how could they get into their program?
Sure. So if they're seeking help, let's start there. If they're seeking help or if they want to give support, the best place I would tell someone to go is to our website. They can also call that same number that I gave out, which is to our administrative office building.
Okay.
But if you go to our website, www.genesisoutreach, that's GENESISOUTREACH.org, genesisoutreach.org. On there, you can see all of our programs. There are applications to apply for our programs right from the website.
Yes.
For help, there are also a page for donations. You can find out, you can donate to specific programs or to the organization in general, but we can always use support. I just did a letter for someone today who's coming to volunteer. And as I said in that letter, we exist because of the funding and the volunteer support of individuals in our community. And so we certainly do need that support.
I love it. Well, Mr. Brownlee, we want to thank you for not only being here with us and sharing your story, but for all of the work that you do in the community and all communities, and for truly being a servant. And if you don't mind, on our way out, I'm actually going to share a quote that you said, and then I'm going to let Clarence lead us out. Work is not work, but it is a ministry for me. It is a way to be a servant leader in our communities to help make a better place for all. So you said that. We appreciate you.
I must be pretty smart.
Yeah. And thank you for being here with us, Mr. Brownlee, and you at home. And as we always say,
always protect your mind.
A podcast by Neutral Voices Media Group. In the Know.